Good evening, everyone. It's Chris Nitzo
And Travis.
from Cyclone Chasers tonight, giving you this update on the road as we head towards our chase location. Tonight, we're going to be talking Tropical Cyclone Ita. We're going to be talking particularly its medium-term track as well as its short-term track. And I guess the big news is that it has been upgraded to a Category 5. Cyclone Chasers are on the way to chase it. We will be live streaming tomorrow for whatever part of that we can until communications may be cut off. We do have a satellite phone in case communications do get cut off. We will be in touch with the outside world. We will be letting our followers know how we're going. We are up to 105,000 followers, so thank you very much and welcome to our new followers. Trav's clapping you all.
Welcome.
And let's get into tonight's update. So here's the latest track map from the Bureau of Meteorology. We can see that it is now a Category 5 severe tropical cyclone at 7 p.m. It was actually upgraded at the 5 p.m. update. And we see that the error margin is quite small now, ranging from around about Cape Melville south to just to the south of Cooktown. However, the key there is that there's still an error margin that even some of the outlying models suggest that the system may not even make landfall, believe it or not. Overall, though, we expect the system to make landfall somewhere to the north of Cooktown or around Cooktown itself, and then push in a southwest and then south and then southeast direction. It may actually pop back off the coast between Cairns and Townsville and reform into a cyclone if it weakens into a low. Now, there isn't a significant track forecast variation between this one and the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, but because the system in the BOM track map moves a lot further inland and is impacted by some very high mountain ranges, that the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre may not be quite representing on their guidance just yet. So we tend to suggest that while the track forecasts aren't overly different, they are very different in terms of their expected intensities. So I'll give you a look here at the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre. So as we said, it's expected to make landfall somewhere in the vicinity of Cooktown. However, that is still a little bit of error in that, but it's not a massive amount of error. It's expected to make landfall sometime tomorrow evening, as most models have been suggesting, and also expected to make landfall as a significant Category 5 tropical cyclone. It is then expected to move inland, Category 3 to be Category 3 west of Port Douglas, and pushing further to the south and then southeast in the medium term. And as I said, be aware that that warning and watch area will extend southwards as time goes on. The Joint Typhoon Warning Centre track puts the coastal crossing right around the Cooktown area and then drags it directly south. So it doesn't push it as far inland as the Bureau of Meteorology track, and that's why the system is able to maintain a lot of intensity. But once again, remembering that the JTWC forecast track does put the system over some fairly high mountain ranges between the Cairns, or at least the Townsville to Cooktown region here. The Great Dividing Range has a lot of height, particularly anywhere from Ingham northwards. We tend to see some very tall mountain ranges, and they will impact the low-level circulation centre, even if it goes 10 kilometres inland. That centre of circulation, if it remains over those ranges, will be disrupted. And I don't know if the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre forecast is accurately representing that in their track forecast. But regardless, the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre expect a severe Category 5 cyclone, even on the American scale, believe it or not, impacting the far north coast of Queensland, and then pushing southwards and not weakening much, and impacting Cairns as a Category 4, and then impacting Townsville as a Category 3. Now, once again, take those categories with a grain of salt. There is still a very large error margin in the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre, particularly to the east. So there is still even a chance on some of the guidance, but it's a very outlying chance that the system won't make landfall and will just get really, really close. But really, we expect it to make landfall. And if we have a look at this little terrifying beauty as she moves in a west-southwest direction, you can see here the eye developing very, very clearly on satellite imagery. It really is looking like a monster of a little system. Here, look, it's not overall as big as Yassi, but it is actually more powerful than Yassi. So if we were to compare the system, or at least it's expected to become more powerful than Yassi. Sorry, not at the moment. It's currently about the same intensity as Yassi, but expected to become stronger, significantly stronger if you follow the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. However, once again, not as large, so the area and impacts will be a lot more localized than, say, they were with Yassi, if you want to be comparing those two systems. Also on the satellite, we can see some excellent outflow coming out of the system as well. So look, folks, there's very little holding this back from continued intensification. I mean, it's going to hit a peak maximum intensity, and it's going to run out of time because it's eventually going to hit the coast or be impacted by the coast. So there is going to be a limit to its intensity, but for now, it's expected to continue to intensify slowly. Once we pierce the pretty clouds with microwave imagery and microwaves, we see that the system has a very nice tight core right in there. Beautiful little pinhole eye developing in the system, and we see this really heavy convection on the outer bands. One of these outer bands will start to impact the coastline probably overnight tonight or early tomorrow as the system tracks to the west-southwest and then southwest, and we will see some of these outer bands. Particularly, one of the things we are very cautious of in those outer bands is the possibility for just the odd, very isolated rain-wrapped tornado because of the way the atmosphere spins in the lower levels, and because of the amount of wind in the lower levels. We see that the potential there for, particularly with such a low cloud base, that a tornado or two may develop, or a water spout or two may develop in these outer bands. I guess we can show you satellite pictures all night about how good this thing looks, and we'd never get tired of it. You can see here, beautiful structure in the system. We take a look at the visible a little bit earlier today when the sun was out. We could see here the eye just starting to form. So if we look at the satellite-derived wind estimates of the system, this is the Queensland coastline. That's Cape Melville. Cooktown lies just around here. And what we see is that the system is still stacked to the southern side, so anywhere south of the system is going to experience the strongest of the winds, and we can really see that in these wind estimates where that really strong core is just on the south of the actual eye itself. However, it is starting to build a bit more of a wind field to the north as opposed to yesterday when it was out here towards PNG. You can just see the southern tip of PNG where my cursor is. The system really had nothing to its north because of those mountainous terrain near PNG was disrupting a lot of the flow. You can see those surface winds, 20 to 25 knots, are starting to impact the Queensland coastline now, and they will get significantly stronger over the next 24 hours. If we look at radar image over the past couple of hours, we can see that the circulation centre is just outside of radar coverage, but we can see these outer bands, remembering these squally outer bands, push well ahead of the cyclone. We've actually seen a little bit of drizzle developing around the Cooktown area itself now, and we'll continue to see that drizzle continue, possibly getting heavier and heavier in spurts tonight before the really intense stuff hits around about lunchtime tomorrow, and then onwards until the core of the cyclone is just off the coast or has hit the coast. So if we take a look at some model guidance, initially we see that fairly close model agreement, but really that red outlier here, the GFN, and the black and green models here and the blue models here, they're really a big difference in that 50-kilometre difference in track, because this red model, if this track comes out, we're going to see a tropical low or a weak cyclone as it tracks south and southeast. If this black, green or blue model comes out, we would see a much more significant system as it tracks to the south and then south-southeast. So as we take a look at the UKMet model, they basically have the system from here moving in a south-southwest direction, making landfall around Cairns, and then pushing in a south-southeast direction all the way south towards Townsville before pushing off the coast of Queensland on the 13th of April. So the UKMet model has become a significant, or has shown a significant shift to the east compared to the UKMet model runs of the past 3 or 4 days. So this particular model run has shifted a long way further to the east. So we don't actually see a landfall around Cooktown. We actually see the landfall more around the Port Douglas, Cairns area, and then the system continues tracking in a south-southeast direction right along the Queensland coastline before pushing east-southeast away from Queensland. GFS model solution looks at more of a southwesterly shift and then a southerly shift as the system is making landfall. So the system basically makes landfall up here at Cape Melville and then pushes south towards Cooktown and then further south towards Port Douglas and Cairns, and then starts to push south-southeast just off the coast of the Cairns to Townsville region, and then pushes further and further offshore as it heads further south. The Canadian CMC model throws a big spanner in the works. It suggests that the system will now push directly south. We haven't seen that in the last few hours, so this model solution is possibly likely to be out by a fair margin. But anyway, the Canadian CMC model suggests a direct south motion to lie just on the coast or off the coast of Ingham, and then pushing in a southeast direction away from Australia. So at no point does the CMC model actually make landfall of the tropical cyclone. Believe it or not, it's probably the world's least accurate model that has probably the closest thing to what we think is going to happen at OCC. The NavGem model suggests a coastal crossing around the Cooktown area, or Cooktown to Cape Melville area, and then a direct shift to the south, and then pushes back offshore between Townsville and Cairns, and then continues pushing southeast. This is probably the scenario that I guess a lot of the guidance overall is tipping, but it's just such a fine line as to whether it actually makes landfall, how far inland it goes, or whether it stays just off the coast, because those little 50-kilometre changes in track guidance forecast make a significant change in track intensity forecasts. So we could see a system that goes 50 kilometres inland, weaken out to a low, and then maybe a weak cyclone as it pushes back off the coast. If the system remains right on the coast, you'll see a weakening trend, so it'll go from a Cat 5 to maybe a Cat 2. But if the system remains offshore, we could be seeing a Cat 4 or 5 system ravaging the coastline as it heads southwards without actually making a landfall. So in the space of about 50 to 100 kilometres, we've covered about a 200 kilometre an hour difference in wind speed. So it just goes to show how variable and how difficult it is to accurately tell you how strong this thing's going to be as it heads southwards. The forecast from the high-resolution FIM8 model, the experimental FIM8 model I should say, not the high-resolution version, is suggesting a coastal crossing around Cooktown, and then pushing south right along the coastline until about Cairns, and then pushing offshore between Cairns and Townsville over the next 3 to 4 days. We're looking at an ensemble view of the guidance available from the UKMet. We can see that in the UKMet, most of the guidance has the system hitting the coast somewhere between Port Douglas and Cape Melville, and I guess that is the favoured consensus from all the model guidance, so there's nothing new there for you. However, we do still see those outliers out here, and we see 3 or 4 of the 20-odd members that suggest that it won't make landfall, but it'll get very, very close. So there is still that element of doubt, and that's what you saw in the Bureau of Meteorology track forecast error. You can see what I'm talking about here with this error margin in this region here. Sorry, I'm using a touchpad instead of a mouse because we're on the road, but you can see what I'm talking about, this grey error margin from here all the way out to here. So we can see that because of that grey error margin, we may see that that the system still has that just outside chance of not making landfall, although, as I said, the most favoured outcome is for it to make landfall somewhere near Cooktown. Folks, because I'm on the road, we're not going to go talking about the meteorological aspects of the movement because it's so finely balanced that the aspects that I talked about the last few nights are still holding relevant tonight. So we're not going to spend another 5 to 10 minutes telling you that everything sits on a knife edge again and showing you all the different mid-level flows. So if you're interested in the meteorological aspects of why it's moving and the way it's moving, please have a look at some of our videos from the last couple of nights, because nothing has changed there. All right, so tomorrow we're looking at rainfall. We're looking at some very heavy amounts anywhere to the east of about Cohen, all the way south to about Ingham, and particularly heavy in the Cooktown South area, just to the south of where the system actually hits land. As we head to Saturday, we see that really heavy rainfall now making it onto the coast, anywhere from Cooktown south to even Townsville being in the firing line on the Saturday. But we also see this central coast of Queensland starting to see some moderate falls of rain as well on a feeder band. So what happens is, as the cyclone hits the coast, we get these northeasterly feeder bands coming through a long way to the south of the system, and they dump a fairly good rainfall in a fairly general and broad area to the south of the cyclone, well south of the cyclone. We also see that some of that rainfall is extending a long way further to the west too. So not in terms of Western Queensland, of course, but in terms of the northern Goldfields and Upper Flinders, the Central Highlands and Coalfields region. So those areas might start to see some pretty decent rain too come late Saturday. And then as we head to Sunday, we'll see Tropical Cyclone Ita continuing to track southwards, so we'll see a clearance of rainfall in the Cairns North region. That region will be then free to mop up and clean up after the cyclone's devastating effects. And as we see the cyclone continuing to push in a southeast direction, we'll see that rainfall, that heavier rainfall, pushing further south, Townsville southwards, even as far as possibly Bundaberg, some of the modelling suggesting. So we could actually see some pretty decent rain through central and even the northern parts of southeast Queensland. Could see some rain out of this as well. But look, overall, we're not going to see too many effects, say, all the way south to about Brisbane. As we head to Monday, then we are left to mop up what has all the danger, I guess, and devastation and damage from Tropical Cyclone Ita, because all of the rain starts to push offshore as Ita pushes southeast away from Queensland. We're left with a very dry air mass coming in its wake, so that will allow the residents from the Cohen to possibly Mackay area to mop up and clean up any damage and destruction that has happened. So if we look at some of the guidance and take a look at the amount of rain that falls from the system and when the rain should start, we can see that tonight there's not much happening on the coast, just some very isolated activity, but that changes by about 4 a.m. tomorrow. So if we take a look at 4 a.m. tomorrow, we will see that some of that rainfall is now starting to hit the coastline, particularly some possibly moderate to heavy falls hitting the North Tropical Coast just to the north of Cairns. As we head to 10 a.m. tomorrow, we see that rainfall really pushes right along the coastline as the system gets close to a landfall here in the far northern parts of the North Tropical Coast region. And we also see that enhanced rainfall right around Cairns again, in a very moist convergent and strong convergent flow to the south of the cyclone. Now this is where things change a little bit, because the latest GFS model has the system lying just east of Cooktown as the cyclone passes right next to Cooktown. So Cooktown would be getting raked by the very destructive core in this particular situation, and we see some moderate to heavy rainfall all over the place to the north of Townsville. And then by 10 p.m. tomorrow night, we expect to see the system crossing the coast somewhere between Port Douglas and just north of Cooktown. So this is the area of maximum rainfall, and we also see some moderate falls of rain all the way through from Mackay northwards. As we head to Saturday 4 a.m, we see the system drifting slowly southwards right along the coastal fringe of the Cairns to Cooktown area, located around about Port Douglas at that point in time. And as we head to 10 a.m. on the Saturday, we see the system is tracking right on top of the northern beaches of Cairns. We see a clearance now over the Cooktown area, or at least a weakening or a drop down in rainfall rates, and we start to see an increase in rainfall rates south of Cairns. We also see this area of very enhanced rainfall lying just off the coast of Rockhampton to Mackay, and that's associated with those feeder bands I talked about earlier in the broadcast. So what we have is the cyclone here. We have a really intense bit of rain right to the south of, just to the south of the centre, but then a long way further south we have this convergent flow of northeasterly winds that results in some very heavy rainfall hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away from the actual centre of the system. As we head to Saturday afternoon, the system lies just to the south of Cairns around Gordonvale, and we start to see some heavy rainfall developing around the Townsville area and northwards. As we head to Saturday night, we see that the system continues to track in a south to south-southeast direction and is possibly now back off the coast between Cairns and Townsville, resulting in extremely heavy rainfalls here between just to the south of Townsville and all the way north to about Innisfail. So really, folks, that is another thing that we need to pay attention to, is this track will result in some very heavy and possibly flash flooding in this entire region. As we head to Sunday morning, we see that the system lies just to the northeast of Townsville, with areas around about Rolling Stone south to about Bowen receiving some extreme rainfall in that 6-hour period. And then as we head to Sunday 10 a.m, we see that the system basically tracks parallel to the coast. So we see a clearance anywhere to the north of Townsville. As the system tracks parallel to the coast, we start to see some heavy rainfall developing around Mackay on Sunday morning. And then as we head to Sunday afternoon, the system continues to track eastwards or southeastwards and still lies fairly close to the coast. And so that's why we see continuation here of some very heavy rainfall continuing to drift southwards towards Mackay. You can see here this area up further to the north where the initial landfall happens, or where the initial proximity to the coast happens, is now free from bad weather, and should be able to start cleaning up well and truly by the Sunday from all the damage and destruction that the system may cause. As we head to Sunday night, then the system will start to track a little bit further offshore, but is still a significant tropical cyclone in the GFS modelling, and creating some fairly heavy rainfall south of Mackay to about Rockhampton, and even possibly as far as Bundaberg. All right, folks, so that's where we're going to leave Tropical Cyclone Ita. We hope you stay safe. That is at least a guide. Now, the last thing, before I do that, is we do need to talk briefly about storm surge. Folks, as I do talk about this, please understand that I am on a touchpad, and it is very difficult to do this broadcast while I'm on the road and in the car. So be aware that the arrows may not be drawn really well. But look, folks, the issue with storm surge is if you lie south of the system centre, because that is where the waters or the winds are able to pile up and drive up the water levels. So you can see here that with the system located just to the east of Cape Flattery, or right around the Cooktown to Cape Flattery area, we can see that the areas south of that is where that water is able to drive up and force itself up over and above what it should, what its tide should be. Now, the big issue, I guess, is if the system continues tracking on or just off the coast, we're going to see a storm surge threat throughout the entire region from just north of Cooktown all the way south to Mackay, because of the fact of that trajectory. Now, if the system tracks further inland, of course, we're not going to see the type of storm surge threat, because it will be a lot weaker. So in talking about storm surges, it's the areas to the south of the system that are more susceptible, or most susceptible, to storm surges. Because if you look at here, as the system is, I'll go through, for instance, and put the system in a little bit more perspective between Cairns and Townsville for you. So here, if we look at the system lying just off the coast of Townsville on Sunday, we can see that the areas to the north are going to see winds coming off the land. And so because of that, the storm surge threat, there is really none there. Now that holds true when the system's up here as much as it holds true for when the system's down here. Look, if you're north of the system, you're unlikely to be receiving a storm surge from it. However, if you're south of the system, you can see that you're getting onshore winds, and those onshore winds will be driving up the seas. Now, I'm only doing this over the top of Townsville for illustrative purposes. It doesn't mean we think that that's where it's going to go. That's just one model projection. But folks, what I want to stress is that if you are right in the core, and just to the south of the cyclone is where the greatest storm surge threat lies. All right, so we don't want to talk about numbers in terms of the height of the storm surge. We leave that to the Bureau of Meteorology. That is the one area that I'm not very confident in when discussing cyclones with you, is the threat of storm surge, because it is the one big killer in tropical cyclones. It's not usually the cyclone that kills people. It's not the wind. It's not the rain. It's the storm surge threat. So, folks, stay safe. Don't mess with the storm surge. If you do live right along the coast, check out your storm surge maps, and listen to the Bureau of Meteorology on their advices for that storm surge threat. But once again, remember, the storm surge threat only exists if you're south of the cyclone or right in the cyclone's core. Thanks very much for watching tonight, folks. Tomorrow, we're hoping to have an update in the morning or around lunchtime from Cooktown, because by the evening, we will be out there experiencing the worst of the cyclone, so we won't have time to update you in a nice, calm manner like I'm doing tonight. Thanks very much for watching tonight. Let's talk tomorrow. Stay safe, everyone.